All right, everybody, come on in the room. Come on in the room. Listen, I have to be honest. This is not a stream that I am particularly looking forward to doing because it's not my personality to be in conflict with people or to, you know, put people on blast or, anything like that. It's just not who I am. But as much as I try to avoid really saying anything too specific about what's been going on recently in the affirming movement, particularly the Black affirming church, and let's just put it all out there on the table because we all know what we're talking about, right? The transition of Bishop McQueen to a non-affirming position, a non-affirming theology. I just realized that there are too many people who are negatively impacted by it for me to just be quiet. It is my responsibility as a spiritual leader. It is my responsibility as someone who is, in terms of affirming theology, someone who's versed in it, someone who has committed his life to preaching that message. It's my responsibility to respond to some of the things that have been shared, some of the things that have sent you all, right, God's people, into frustration, doubt, disappointment, disillusionment, so many different ways that people are processing uh, what's been going on over the course of these last couple of days. And so I just thought that I would add my voice to a growing number of people who are offering commentary, um, just so that as many people can be helped as possible. I watched the video that Bishop Keith McQueen did on, what was it? We Need to Talk, I think is what it's called, the podcast. I watched the video. I had to break it down into a couple of parts to watch it, to get through it, just because I got a lot going on. And it was a very long interview. Had a lot of stuff involved. The first time I watched it, though, I watched the first half of it initially. And when I watched it, there were things that I thought, okay, I'm going to need to respond to that. I'm going to need to respond to that. I'm going to need to respond to that, right? These different points that was brought up. But most of them, there were a couple of things that really did rub wrong. Most of them were like, okay, his theology is just warped. It's not on point. It's not biblical. It's parroting much of the existing patriarchal, homophobic theology that we've all already been accustomed to. So it's like nothing new here, except the fact that it's a person who was a leader in the affirming movement now recanting that. That's really what's being added to the mix. It's not so much just the fact that of what he's teaching, because it's nothing new. A few things did rub me wrong though, but initially, in making the decision that I needed to do a video, my first thought was, well, I'll just do a video completely about his theology. Not my intention to have any type of personal attacks or any ad hominem, as we would say, because that's not what it's about. It's not about Keith McQueen as a person. It's about the particular theologies that he's putting forward. And so, like I said, a couple things he said were like problematic, even on a personal level, but, kind of goes with the territory. But then I watched the second half and I thought, oh, hell no. It went even further downhill. And I realized I'm not going to be able to avoid dealing with this on a personal level, because it wasn't just theology that was dealt with on that interview. And let's be honest about something. There wasn't a whole lot of theology given. Most of what I got dealt with his psychology, right? Dealt with his antiquated ideology. Not much was actually theological. It sounded theological because he, like many other Christian leaders, has mastered the art of code switching for the pulpit. And now we can't even have a regular conversation because you've put yourself in minister mode. And now how you speak. You have to articulate things in a particular way that makes it sound legitimate, that makes it sound profound and prolific, rather than just, having real talk. So yeah, for people who are unlearned, I would say theologically, it sounded typically religious. And of course, people who already agree with the position that he was putting forward, they're going to eat that up. Because he checked the boxes that many people in the Black church, particularly, especially, look for, right? The cadence of voice, the tonality, all of that stuff that goes along with Black preaching. But it was really bereft of any theological substance. And it just bled with mental and psychological issues, psychological and mental projections that were just unfairly lobbed at my community, at the LGBTQ plus community. So I knew that I had to say something. And so that's what I'm here to do. It was a 2.5-hour interview. I've clipped it as much as I can so that this stream doesn't last too long, but it's not going to just be a 30-minute stream, right? But I'm going to try to get through it as best I can while still doing justice to my responses to some of the things that he shared. As many people who have offered commentary have said, I will also say it is my intention to be direct. It is my intention to not pull punches, quote unquote, but it is not my intention to personally attack Keith McQueen. First of all, disclaimer, I don't know him. I was a guest on one of his live streams. He was a guest on my podcast. Beyond that, a couple of comments on each other's posts over time on Facebook, maybe a couple of DMs, private messages. Outside of that, I really don't know him. And so to that end, I'm not qualified to offer too much of a personal critique, because most of what I would offer would have been hearsay. And I've heard some things for years. But that's neither really here nor there. It's going to probably have to come up a little later in responding to some of the points that he raises. But my intention is not to offer a personal critique, because I don't know him well enough to do that. And I also want to say that I'm always concerned about people who are wrestling in the area of LGBTQ plus affirmation and their place in God and their place in, their ability to love themselves and things like that. I'm always concerned about self-harm. I'm always concerned about what depth of despair is this going to take this person into. And so even seeing how people are reacting to him, it makes me concerned about him. And is he okay? We can always put up a brave face. Especially as spiritual leaders, we've mastered the art of putting on a brave face. He's clearly mastered the art, right? By his own admission, the things that he said in the podcast. So I'm not throwing shade. It's what he's actually said. And so, yeah, there's a part of me that's concerned, and I don't want to add fuel to any fire that he may already be experiencing. But the reality is, when you put something out there publicly, it's going to be scrutinized. It should be scrutinized. And people have a right to react to it. They have a right to feel how they feel about it. And what you don't get to do is make yourself the victim when you were the perpetrator. And unfortunately, I've seen that in some of the ways that he is responding to how people are responding to his initial interview, and then even to the interview that Will Horn did at the time of this, that he did last night. I guess he's not happy that people are not responding the way that he desires for them to respond. I'm not sure why, because he didn't really answer any of the questions that were posed to him. He just gave this word salad roundabout diversion from pretty much, I would say, 80% of the questions that were put to him. And I was glad that Will Horn pressed him on some things. He repeated some questions. He elaborated on why he was looking for a particular answer. And oftentimes he still didn't get a direct answer, which was quite a different appearance, quite a different way of being present in that experience than he had in that initial interview on and I think it's called We Need to Talk podcast. Questions were asked, questions were answered, right? And so I saw a comment on Will Horn's stream. A person said, "We need you to bring that same energy that you brought to that other stream." And all I could do is like, amen it. You're kind of right, because this is not the same type of thing that we see. And so anyway, I've labored on enough. Let's go ahead and dig in, because there's a lot to unpack. There's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to uncover. And I want to try to do justice to it. So let's dig in.
And my grandparents were very guarded over me. I think they saw the tendencies, because I had some very effeminate tendencies. Now, part of that was because I was predominantly in the church, and the church is a female sport. We often critique young men who are effeminate in church without realizing there hasn't been enough of a masculine presence to show what does masculine worship look like? What does masculine surrender look like? What does masculine engagement in the house of God?
All right. So right here, we kind of just get out of the gate with just a challenging notion, a couple of challenging notions right here in this clip. First of all, I want to point out the fact that he describes his grandparents as being pretty heavy-handed, if you will, very guarded, I think was a terminology that he used over him. I don't want to comment on that just yet, but that's going to come up again. So put a pin in that notion that his grandparents were very guarded, right? But one of the other things that he talks about is this idea of worship. How do people know what masculine worship looks like? And I mean, that is so cringe to me, because it's the insinuation that worship can only truly be worship when it looks a certain way, when it fits a certain sociological, not theological, a sociological construct of what makes for because this changes and evolves over time and over culture all the time. And so my worship to God has to look or be consigned to the present sociological expectations regarding how I'm supposed to exist and express myself to my God, who knows me better than anybody else. And so this theology, if you want to call it that, robs people of the ability to worship in spirit and in truth, which is the type of worship that Jesus said the Father was actually looking for, because I can't come into that experience fully me. I can't even bring my whole self into that experience, because I'm spending too much time trying to figure out if I'm holding my hand right, if I'm clapping right, if I'm rocking right. I'm too busy trying to figure out if I'm checking all the boxes of masculinity that people like now Bishop McQueen are putting or requiring of other people in order for their worship to be deemed legitimate. My experience of worship shouldn't be about me. It should be about the one I'm worshiping. But now I have to figure out, am I masculine enough to be accepted by God? I think that is absolutely ludicrous. And it flies in the very face of what worship is supposed to be about. There are plenty, he talks about the church being a women's sport, right? Cute line. The other guy got the other guy laughing and everything. Whereas it's true, you take women out of churches, most of them will close, because most of them are upheld by the presence and participation of the women in those congregations. The illogic of the point itself as it relates to a person's sexuality or gender expression, right? Masculinity, femininity, the illogic of that being applied to how many women are in the church, I can't, it's inestimable. So for example, most people were brought up in churches, right, that have a majority of women. So was I. Well, see, but you're gay, so you're kind of making this point. Well, am I though? My brother was also brought up in that same church, my older brother. He's not gay. There are other young boys who were brought up in the same church. They're not gay. So there are too many people for which that does not apply to just make the suggestion. It wasn't even a suggestion. It was a flat out statement that because the church is full of women, that's the only way that you know how to express yourself. There are people who are not just not gay, but are also plenty masculine, not because they're putting on a front trying to fit in, but just because that's their own natural expression. But then we also apply that same logic to the home, because we hear this a lot in non-affirming spaces, that, part of the reason that men are gay or men are feminine is because they were raised by a single mother or a domineering mother, a heavy-handed mother with a strong personality. Again, there are countless young men who were raised, they're men now, right, who were raised by single mothers. Just as masculine, just as straight. And so what I don't appreciate is from a gay person who really should know better, especially because you claim to have come from that indoctrination into freedom, even though now you're going back into it. You should know better than to try to find some naturalistic explanation for the fact that you're gay or for the fact that you're feminine. You're gay because you were born that way. Right? And so whatever it is that you think your grandparents saw in you, that wasn't put in you by the church. It wasn't put in you by the preponderance of women in your life. Unlike a lot of people, you were actually raised with the man in the house. Why are you feminine? And apparently he was a very strong personality by all accounts. So why were you feminine at all? If he was such a strong personality, why didn't you pattern and model yourself after that example that he set for you? Right? It's because you were just being. You were not living to try to reproduce something else. You were just being Keith. And Keith wasn't masculine enough for them. And the fact that you have now adopted that perspective and that blame of women for your natural mannerism, which is still on you. So then the question becomes like, are you going to now have to try to go work on that and try to buff yourself up and buck up and man up and, be, I don't know the word, masculinated? You're going to take some extra testosterone so that you can fit in now?
I wasn't really taught. I didn't know. The church didn't really have real conversation.
You weren't equipped.
I wasn't equipped. I was not equipped. I had a sword that I did not know how to use. That my enemy was more acquainted with.
No. No. This is huge.
Yeah.
First of all, this is the blueprint how to get lost in college.
Yes.
Having a sword that you don't know how to use. Your enemies who aren't afraid of education and knowledge, who use education, knowledge, articulation, take your sword and you said the truth sets you free, but now the lie is going to bind you.
Yes.
Now, I'll be the first to say that the church does not do a good job of teaching when it comes to human sexuality. Obviously, in many cases, they don't know enough about it because they still have these antiquated perceptions of homosexuality. But just human sexuality in general, even when it comes to heterosexuality, the church just is not equipped to deal with it. I've mentioned many times how years ago I posted a statement on my Facebook wall, and asked, does God have a penis? Now, my intent in asking that was to get at the fact that God is spirit. And so this whole idea of patriarchy, because we're trying to model ourselves after God didn't even have a penis. So why are we valuing people who have a penis above those who don't? Giving them authority, giving them power, making them the heads of house, right? So I was trying to come against that, but you couldn't imagine how many people came for me in the comments just because I used the words God and penis in the same sentence. People who felt like I was dishonoring God. Why? Because I said penis? Wasn't it God that gave us penises? Wasn't it God that made penises? But and even now, there are probably some people clutching their pearls even now because I said the P word. And I'm like, if we can't even use it ain't like I said dick. If we can't even use the anatomically correct language to describe human anatomy without any association, this had no association with sexual activity. It was just the anatomical part, penis. And people went in, even LGBTQ plus people, because we have been so conditioned to view our physical bodies and especially our sexual parts as inherently sinful, wrong, dirty, unclean, that the very notion of even asking about that in relation to God was sacrilegious, was heresy almost. That says something about how the church is ill-equipped to deal with these types of issues. So I'm not surprised at all that Keith McQueen's experience was that he was not really tooled with enough biblical confidence, if you will, to be able to adequately address these issues. I'm sure that was the case. But now I will also add the fact that, and this actually popped up a number of times. I don't think I'm going to go to it every moment in this stream, but it also popped up a number of times how supposedly there's this insinuation that if a person is coming with scripture and it sounds good, that's just the enemy lying to you. That if it's not consistent with traditional theology, that's just a lie of the enemy. It doesn't matter that it sounds good. It doesn't matter that it sounds right. That's just the enemy twisting scripture. And all I can do is just blame my church for not giving me the tools. And so here's the question that I have to ask. And this is rhetorical because I'm not directly asking Keith McQueen, but the question that I have to ask is, okay, well, when did you learn how to use that sword? Because what you're recounting is 20 years ago, 25 years ago, however long ago it was. At some point, I would imagine during your pastorate, during your ongoing growth, and then your pastorate, and then your bishopric, at some point, I would imagine that you learned how to use this sword. So why is this transition only happening now? Had you not looked into these matters before then? Or did you not believe it but continue to preach it? There's a little more about that coming too.
When Jesus was first isolated from community into the wilderness, he had to wrestle with theology. He had to wrestle with his theology. Throw yourself off of this mountain. It is written. You bow down to me. It was a wrestling with identity and theology.
Mm-hmm.
I came under a wrestling of identity and theology. And if you don't know who you are and you don't know what you believe, they're going to tell you who you are and they're going to tell you what to believe.
If you don't know who you are and you don't know what you believe, they're going to tell you who you are. Isn't that something? Seems to me that that's a perfect description of LGBTQ plus people not knowing who they are and being told who they are by the non-affirming church who's seeking to make them deny who they are, deny their identity. Let me also just point out the fact that Jesus's experience in the wilderness was not a theological wrestling match. Okay. I don't want to like nitpick what everything he said, but there was Satan certainly came against his identity, but we don't find in the text Jesus warring with his identity. We find him countering everything that the enemy threw at him because he was already confident in who he was. We don't find him wrestling with it. And we also don't find him wrestling theologically. There was no questions. There was no uncertainty. Jesus responded, "It is written." He knew what the text said, and he wasn't falling for what the enemy was trying to do in order to get him to reject who he was. And it's funny because he was trying to use who he was, if you are the Son of God, right, in order to get him to reject who he was by feeling the need to prove who he was to the enemy. I don't have to prove who I am to you by turning this stone to bread, by jumping off of this cliff. I don't have to prove who I am to you, because by virtue of the fact that I'm trying to prove it to you, I'm demonstrating that I'm not confident enough in who I am, that I still feel like I have something to prove. And unfortunately, I believe, this is Romeo here, I believe that Keith McQueen still feels like he has something to prove. Something to prove to his family, which came up later, something to prove to the mainstream church, maybe the church group that he used to be a part of, maybe the people that he is submitted to currently. That he still feels like he has to prove that he is useful in the kingdom. Despite all that he's already done, all that he's already accomplished, he still feels like he has something to prove. That is because identity is not found in accomplishment. You can start as many organizations as you want. You can start as many churches as you want. You can have a huge of a following as you want. It does not root and ground you in your identity. But I'll also point out that your identity, if it is true, it cannot be a fabrication brought on by social pressure. It can't even be a fabrication brought on by religious pressure. Jesus went into that wilderness knowing who he was. He didn't wrestle it out. It wasn't a wrestling match. He went in knowing who he was, which is why he was able to come out the same way he went in. But unfortunately, what Keith McQueen is describing here is that he's wrestling with who he is, because even now, even after all these years in ministerial leadership, he still doesn't know. It still hasn't been settled in his heart. Now, that breaks my heart for a number of reasons. Number one, just because you're beloved of God, just because you are a believer, but also because you are a leader. And unfortunately, and this is not a Keith McQueen thing, this is not even an affirming thing, this is a church-wide thing. There are so many leaders who are only doing what they're doing because they have something to prove. Do you know how many churches have started? Affirming churches, non-affirming churches, churches period, because the person who started it had something to prove. And so ultimately, this is the reverse of what Keith McQueen thinks it is. He's succumbing to the enemy's attacks against his identity by now trying to become something he's not, in order to prove to the people who doubted him, to the people who delegitimized him, that he is somebody. Keith, you don't have anything to prove to anybody. You don't.
Within the LGBTQ community, you form a lot of familial ties, because many LGBTQ plus people have been removed from their families. They've been kicked out from their families. So they form these families. The problem is when you form a family in brokenness.
Oh my gosh.
Without understanding, you're calling this person a father, but you don't know the ministry of a father. And you're not even healed enough to be a son.
So it's trauma bonding.
It's trauma.
Organized trauma
It's
bonding.
organized trauma bonding.
It is certainly true that people in the LGBT community form a lot of familial bonds with people. And just like you said, because in many cases, they have no family. Their family abandoned them. Their family did not accept them for who they were. And so, yeah, that does indeed exist. I found it troubling that he puts up this false standard for what is required to start a family. It's interesting that people who start biological families don't have to meet this particular standard, or you're not healed enough. You don't know what being a father is. You're not healed enough to be a son. Do fathers know what a lot of fathers don't know what being a father is. A lot of mothers don't know what being a mother is. And you know what they do? They learn along the way, because oftentimes it's the very nature of the relationship that they have with the child that teaches them how to better be a parent. What do they always say? There's no school book, there's no rule book about being a parent, right? That's oftentimes what people say. But now, if you're a part of a chosen family, because you didn't have the blessing of having a good enough connection with your biological family due to their ignorance, an ignorance that you're perpetrating. I say you like I'm talking to Keith McQueen, but an ignorance that Keith McQueen is perpetuating is a better way to put that. Now they aren't legitimized in the forming of those familial bonds. I think that's offensive. Now, anybody who knows me knows I don't use that word lightly. Rarely do I use the word offense or offended or anything like that. I can't be offended. This stuff has to roll off my back because I do this for a living, right? And so, the level of onslaught that I get day in and day out from non-affirming people, particularly, you have to have thick skin. But to hear this from somebody who should know better, from somebody who claims to have known better, it's okay to have a theological shift. I had a theological shift when I went from being non-affirming to affirming. I'm not having another one going back the other way, but right? I don't really care. That's what you believe between you and God. And if you need to believe it and teach according to what you believe, do what you have to do. But what we're not going to do is delegitimize, in some ways, a form of bond that has kept people alive, that has given them hope to be able to exist in the world and not be alone, to not feel isolated and alone, that they could actually feel like they know what it means to call somebody dad, or they know what it means to call somebody mom, because they didn't have that, or it put a bad taste in their mouth when they did it. And now you want to take that away from them under the guise of some theological assumption that you're making? I find that problematic. And then there was this problem with them calling this type of connection a trauma bond. I mean, dog on it. Talk about going for the jugular. First of all, that's not what that's called. And this is kind of what happens when people try to sound, this happens a lot theologically too. People try to sound theological and they're trying to sound profound, and what they're saying makes no theological sense whatsoever. Well, in this case, he's trying to sound, philosophical and to have an understanding of psychology and things. That's not even what a trauma bond is. A trauma bond is when you are forming an unhealthy attachment with your abuser. It's when you form this attachment with your abuser, not with somebody who's offering you respite and rescue from your abuse. And so, in fact, the trauma bond would be like McQueen forming an attachment with the people who kicked him out of the church, forming an attachment or a sense of I don't know, committedness. That's not the word I'm looking for. But anyway, faithfulness, whatever the word I'm looking for, to the people who ostracized him and to the people who, ridiculed him and didn't think that he was good enough, the people who used him for his gift, as he said elsewhere in the interview. That would be the trauma bond, not bonding with people who embraced you and accepted you, not bonding with people who were not your abuser. And so it's interesting that this would come up in this particular conversation, because the misuse of the terminology of trauma bond actually indicts what he's trying to actually do by returning to Egypt, to a group of people who don't accept him as a gay person, to a group of people who will always look at him side eye, because no matter what he does, he's going to have that femininity attached to him. And so there are going to always be people who are saying that he has a homosexual spirit, regardless of what his theology may be. But he's formed this trauma bond with them because of his perception of the legitimacy of what they offer, that he doesn't think he can get anywhere else because of his particular scope of experiences. A lot more to say about that. Okay. Now, there may be something to be said about the attachments that we form as LGBTQ plus people, if you want to try to give some psychological language to it. There may be something to be said in some instances about a notion of attachment theory, but that's not a trauma bond, at least not as defined by psychologists. Okay. But so anyway, yeah, I was like, wait a minute, that's not what a trauma bond is. And then I actually had to like pause the video and go ask AI, because I wanted to make sure, like, wait a minute, that's not what a trauma bond is. And I needed to confirm that that's not what a trauma bond is. Confirmed.
One of the first things I begin to notice within the affirming community is this hypersexuality. Now, mind you, I was a virgin when I went into the movement. And I began to be pressed upon by many people. And at first I thought the motivation behind it was love, until I began to realize for many of them, the motivation behind it was lust. It was lust. It was very lust driven. It was being invited into threesomes, being invited into sexual encounters, being pursued. And of course, eventually I did lose my virginity and begin to engage in just promiscuous behavior.
Now, my first inclination was to respond by saying, it's the affirming church is not hypersexual. And then, I thought, ain't no sense in telling that lie. There are some affirming people, there are some affirming churches, there are some affirming ministries that, let's just have real talk, are hypersexual. Let's just call a thing a thing. There are many that are not. Let's point that out. There are hypersexual straight people too, right? But rather than just going into straight people do it too, what I really want to talk about, rather than denying that there is some legitimacy, the way he characterized it is false, is a lie. He made it seem like the whole movement is hypersexual. That is not true. But per capita, you might say, is there a greater degree of hypersexuality within affirming spaces? My honest answer to that would be yes. But that is not an indictment against the affirming church or the affirming community. It's not an indictment against LGBTQ plus people or LGBTQ plus Christians. That is an indictment against the heteronormative paradigm of the anti-gay, non-affirming church. When you have been reduced, when your whole identity has been reduced to your sexuality, people begin to internalize that. And sometimes that manifests in ways that there are many ways we can put this, ways that are unhealthy or ways that are ungodly, whichever ways that you might want to characterize it or affirm it or state it. And I do believe that there are some who disagree. I do believe that promiscuous, non-covenanted sex is not God's highest and best, because I do believe that our bodies are sacred. I do believe that our bodies are special. I do believe that our bodies are holy, and that we don't just give it to anybody. You're worth more than that. Your body is worth more than that, right? And yet, to turn around and to blame people without considering what contributed to, fed, and in many ways created that pathology is highly problematic. Again, as many of my critiques will be, especially coming from somebody who was on the inside, who should know better. So let me ask the question, let me rephrase it. Do you know how wrong it would be to call someone who became promiscuous after sexual abuse, to call that person a whore? To say that that person is hypersexual? And even though, by the number of ticks, if you're keeping, tabs, right, it may certainly appear that way on paper. Everything needs context. It's not just and this is the problem with a lot of traditional church theology. It's not just a question of go deeper than that. Quit being lazy. It should be theologically lazy. It's a question of why. What is contributing to the undesirable behavior that we're seeing on the surface? If we go deeper than that, so I use the example of a rape victim, and this has been known to happen, right? Where they, in a way of coping with the trauma of that sexual assault, that's how they do it. That's how they cope. I'm sure there are psychological terminology to describe the situation much better than I am. I'm not a psychologist. I don't play one in church. But I think that the same kind of phenomenon can be seen. Think about how, Black people, we have been called the N-word through the course of slavery and then guess what? We started calling each other that. Well, see, y'all called each other that. Well, did you ever ask why? What type of generational cultural trauma has contributed to an internalizing, initially in very harmful ways, of how we began to view ourselves the way that the racist white American power structure viewed us. But then as we began to grow from that and graduate from that, in some ways, people just started to use it just as I'm reclaiming this, and you don't just get to own it. It's my own word now. And so many people, even in the LGBTQ plus community, have used like the F word. It starts with the F, it ends with G. I don't want to say it. But some of them have reclaimed that. Many women call each other the B word all the time. Don't be a man and do that to call a woman a B, right? Probably a gay would be okay, right? But the idea that people in how they process and deal with the mistreatment of other people, the language they use, the ways that they reduce them in terms of their humanity, how they process that won't always look polished and neat and clean. And your job, our job as spiritual leaders, is to help people to navigate that in a way that is more healthy, not criticize them or use that as an excuse to delegitimize their existence as LGBTQ plus people altogether. Because the affirming church, you know why the affirming church might have more instances of hypersexuality than non-affirming churches? Because that's where all the people who have been reduced to their sexuality are pigeonholed. That's become the sexuality ghetto. Why is there so much crime in the ghetto? That's become the sexuality ghetto, where all the people who are too good have ostracized them and kicked them out of decent society, and then bottlenecked them into this ghetto. If you don't know, I'm describing the Black American experience, right? And so then it makes sense. You understand then how these types of behaviors can be more prevalent in certain spaces, particularly when the types of healing and the types of integration of our total self isn't necessarily being as effective as it could and even should be in the church. Because let's remember that a lot of the people who are starting churches are not psychologists. A lot of people aren't even theologians. Keith McQueen, I don't want to get personal, but Keith McQueen does not have any formal theological training. Okay? And so we're opening up these spaces for different reasons. Sometimes that's a whole nother story. I might talk about that a little later in the thing, but sometimes it's because something is broken in us and we want to use this as a space to feel validation. So I'm going to start a church because that'll cause people to look upon me with adulation and praise and give me a sense of worth that I don't have in and of myself. Sometimes people create churches, start churches because they see the need and they want to give people a space to connect with God and others and grow in a safe space, in a safe environment, so that they don't have to feel like the only way that they can be in community is to go into these toxic spaces. They won't accept them for who they are. There are many reasons why, but a lot of people are starting churches without formalized training. And so it makes sense that they don't necessarily have the tool. They don't have the tools in the mainstream church in most cases. In fact, they're not even talking about sex and sexuality in a whole lot of mainstream churches. So you think, well, why ain't we should be talking about it in an affirming church? Many people who are starting affirming churches don't have the tools, and people can't give what they don't have. Now, in a perfect world, would they have gone and gotten those tools first? Sure. This is not a perfect world. Sometimes the need is so urgent that it's like parenting. I got to learn this on the job. But in the meantime, people have to have a safe space to go. There are people on the way out of Christianity altogether. There are people on the way out of this natural life. They need somewhere safe to go. And so, yeah, there are people who are starting churches who don't have every tool in their tool belt. And so I wish that we did a better job of ministering to people's sexual wholeness and identity. But let's not act like you weren't a part of that problem, because what you described, what you all will see in a whole lot of this interview is projecting. There was a whole lot of projecting going on. And it's kind of like what I observed in the Trump administration. It's like their accusation is an admission.
They would see me and my spouse, and we would flow in prophecy together and all the above, and the room would be slain, and they're like, man, the hand of God is here. No, we're just two called individuals in a sinful situation, but the gifts are there before he formed me in the womb.
So, as a gay man who is married to a man, this was quite offensive. I'm not surprised, obviously, if somebody's theology is such that homosexuality, being gay, or living in a way that is consistent with living sexual romantically in a way that is consistent with one's orientation is a sin. If one has that perspective, then I'm not surprised that they would view a marital situation as being sinful. I guess my only question for him would be, when did you come to that conclusion? Right? How deep? Because he kind of talks in the interview like this is something that's been nagging him the whole time, whether or not God affirms LGBTQ plus people, that he was never fully convinced in his own mind. He talks later on about his being a prophet, and as a prophet, there's always that awareness in his spirit to the wrongness of a thing, even though it appears so right. Which says to me that unless you became a prophet much later in your ministry, but you said in your interview that you were, called like in scripture, like in Jeremiah, in the womb, then my question would be, why did you start a church not even knowing? Why would you start an affirming movement? Isn't that reckless? I'm going to start an affirming movement telling people that it's okay for them to be gay, but I'm not thoroughly convinced of it myself. I might be sending you to hell, but I'm going to still start it anyway. Why? What kind of sense does that make? Were you really obeying the voice of God, or were you seeking some other type of soothing to your own personal conflicts and your own personal crises of identity? Were you using the church? Were you using ministry as a way to legitimize yourself in your own eyes or in the eyes of people who told you you couldn't do and wouldn't be? Were you using these people who put their trust in you as their spiritual leader by teaching them something that you yourself wasn't sure about? When did you find out? When, and then married someone unsure? Where they do that at? You've got to be thoroughly convinced in your own mind and heart before you step out dragging other people into something you don't even know for sure yourself. I was just stunned that this is the perception that he has, now that he's divorced. And of course, the circumstances of the divorce, nobody knows. I'm not going to sit here and try to pretend to act like I know or pretend to try to figure out. That's their personal business. But I will say that if you divorced for spiritual reasons, it wouldn't really be spiritual. If you divorced for religious reasons, theological reasons, that probably would have been a good admission to make to those you lead who were still in marriages or even still seeking marriages, seeking the type of marriage that you got out of, and yet you still married them. Because you talked about that in your interview with Will Horn. I say you like I'm talking to him, but he talked about that in his interview with Will Horn, that he married people that he didn't even believe should be married. And I'm like, what? There's no, I require premarital counseling in order to marry a couple. And there's no way I'm putting my name on that line if I don't believe that they can make it. I'm just not doing it. And there are people out there, you pay the honorarium, I'll marry you. I provide my services for so much. I'm not out here for the honorarium. I want y'all to make it. And I'm not marrying folk just because they're going to pay me or just because, I'm the pastor and it's my responsibility to do it. No, I'm putting my seal as the mandate of God on this marriage. No, I'm not doing that. And so I was kind of surprised when he said that. And so it seems to me like what is your theology about matrimony? What is your theology about marriage such that you would hold it in such a low regard that you yourself would enter into a marriage that you weren't sure about, that you would leave a marriage on the basis of what you're becoming sure about it would appear to be the case. But how long did you stay married when you did become sure and just believed that it was a sin? This is all guesswork because we don't know any of these answers. And how many people did you marry? Did you bring into this legal and spiritual union and didn't even believe they should be together? That is reckless. That is and that doesn't fly in the face of your theology. That flies in the face of your character. That even if your theology has shifted, evolved, devolved, however you want to characterize it, I have to now question the way you think and the way you function. Because that right there, it's a no-no.
And I had to face the fact that I was living a lie. A lot of my colleagues that I love, and loved in that movement, we were presenting something that when you got behind closed doors, it just wasn't real. Wasn't real.
What do you mean by that?
We're presenting these healthy, monogamous, same-sex marriages that are not healthy. They're not monogamous. they are barely marriages.
Whereas I appreciated his honesty in this, what I didn't appreciate was Louise. Why are you dragging other people into this? Talk about your marriage. Talk about what you did or didn't do in your marriage. It sounds to me like you weren't monogamous in your marriage. Did that contribute to the divorce, or was it spiritual? Like, which one was it? And why drag other people into it, right? So I'm trying to. I want to be direct and honest and upfront, but I also don't want to come across as too antagonistic, because God in heaven knows that's not my intention. But we have to. But you put it out there, and so that puts it up to scrutiny. So my question would be, or my challenge would be, why presume that because this is how you engaged in marriage, that this may be how friends of yours, particular ministry colleagues of yours, engaged in marriage, that describes the whole community, the whole LGBTQ plus community. The aspersion cast on the entire affirming community because you weren't faithful in your marriage is despicable, and it is disgusting. I, Romel Parks Weekly, have been married now. I have to count it because we have 3 different marriage dates because we got married before marriage equality. So not legally, but before God and God's people, we've been married for 12 years. I have not been unfaithful, and I dare any liar to claim otherwise. So there you have it, right? And the only reason that I say that is not to say that I'm better than him or not to say that I'm better than anybody else. It's just to point to a case in point, because I almost have to say it in order to delegitimize the claim he made. Because if I wasn't faithful in my own marriage, then all I could offer is rhetoric in response. Well, I think that there are other faithful people, but I mean, if I can't know it from my own experience, then how can I put that out there like that? So yes, there are unfaithful people in marriages, in the affirming church, in the non-affirming church. There are straight male pastors in the non-affirming church impregnating women in their congregations that they're not, and they ain't the first lady. We see it all the time. But all of a sudden, it's none of the affirming people are faithful in their marriages.
Real, and I'm not going to speak about their marriage. I'll speak about mine.
Come on.
Dishonest, trying to portray and perpetuate something that just wasn't true. And finally, I could feel the heartbeat of God, and I knew that God was not in this. I just knew it. I had to get out.
Well, thanks for speaking about your own marriage.
And the Lord just began to reveal to me and speak to me and said, look at that individual there. And I looked at him, and the Lord spoke to me and said, inside of him is a son and a father. And the world is going to be robbed. A bloodline is going to be robbed of a holy lineage, a legacy, an assignment.
So he used the terminology of bloodline a number of times through the course of that interview. Talked about this idea of legacy and sonship and fathership and parentage and things like that. One of the other things that I found offensive, and it's funny because I'm so hard to offend, but a few things in this interview was like straight up offensive to me. As an adoptive father who loves my son with all of my heart, like every fiber of my being, the delegitimization of families that exist aside from a biological tie is offensive. This isn't even just an LGBTQ issue. This is how many heterosexual people? There's a heterosexual in my congregation who was an adoptive parent. Straight. And an adoptive parent. But the bloodline is delegitimized. Right? It is the reality that some people cannot have children biologically as a function of their sexuality. They choose not to, right? There may be health reasons why, whatever the case is. They don't want to lose their figure. Whatever the reason is, it's their choice. And so the old school pressure that is brought to bear on people to have children. When are you going to start your family? I used to get so irked and angry when people would ask me that. In my first marriage, some of y'all may not know, I was married to a woman for 6 years, and we would get asked that all the time. And my only response would always be, I have started my family. I'm married. Number one, why does a family necessitate children? And number two, on the basis of Keith McQueen's theology, why does it necessitate biological children? Why is it? And he clearly is talking biology because he kept using the word bloodline, which to me is hocus pocus. Why does there have to be a biological bloodline in order for somebody to be legitimized? Jesus' own lineage in the Gospels traces through Joseph, his father, who was not his biological father. But according to scripture, he may as well have been, because his parentage was just as legitimate as Mary's. So how do you theologize that? That is so patriarchal. That's the root of it, honestly. And a lot of what he talked about in this interview was rooted and steeped in patriarchy, rooted and steeped in it. Which again, I was kind of surprised. I'm like, you should know better than this. But yeah, so this idea of lineage and legacy and biology and bloodline, it delegitimizes so many other family structures, so many other family units. If they don't want to have children, but they're perfectly biologically capable of having it, he just delegitimized their chosen family structure. And that is not okay.
I said, okay, well, Lord, you just have to completely take away every thought and temptation for men. And I heard the Lord speak to me and said, my grace is sufficient.
Nope. You don't get to use that. Well, you get to use it, but no, that's just a cop-out. How are you going to call God the strong deliverer, which scripture calls him, right? The deliverer. And yet his answer is not to deliver you from this horrible sin. Now he talks about this later on. I think I have it clipped as well, where he justifies it on the basis of everybody's pathway is not through deliverance. Some people's pathway is through discipline. And so some people might be delivered from homosexuality where somebody like him is just disciplined through it, such that he has to take authority over it. He still has to desire, like a person desires chocolate, like a person desires too much junk food, which is the analogy that he used later on in the thing. I don't remember if I clipped it or not. And so he has to exercise discipline even though he's not delivered. And there's a few problems with that. Number one, there is a difference between what many Christians call deliverance and discipline. I think that our whole deliverance theology is messed up anyway, but I don't have time to get into that. But that's a carryover from Pentecostalism that we need to really reevaluate, because technically the Bible doesn't even teach that. The way we talk about deliverance in the church, the Bible doesn't teach that. But we have created so many theologies in the church, and done these things, practiced these things in ways that have been harmful to people by giving them false expectations. So I appreciate the honesty of his acknowledgement. I don't think that he acknowledged it in this particular clip. No, yes, he did. He just did, about the fact that he's not delivered, even though he used that term "delivered." The God delivered me. He used that multiple times during the interview, but I'm going to chalk it up to him meaning that God delivered him from the bad theology of affirmation. But he sure didn't deliver him from his same-sex attraction. I don't know why God would deliver him from his theology, but not from his attractions. But anyway, but the cop-out, first of all, Paul's thorn in the flesh, there's no indication that it was a moral issue. In fact, there's every indication that it was most likely a physical issue. There are some theologians who believe that he actually had a vision impairment. And there's some hints to that in one of his epistles. I think it's in 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, one of those. But there's some hint to that might be the case. We don't know what ultimately the thorn in the flesh was, but we've created this thorn in the flesh theology that we just use basically to pacify ourselves and to give ourselves an out for not experiencing what we were expecting. And I think that it's disingenuous, and I also think that it's dangerous to lead people, number one, into expecting deliverance from homosexuality, from same-sex attractions. Let's call it that, because we have a problem with identity and don't want to use certain words. Let's call it same-sex attractions. But again, Keith McQueen was honest in this interview and said that he still experiences them. And I appreciate that. I really do. Because a lot of folk lie. But even this idea of discipline, if I have to walk this out by means of discipline and not by means of God changing my desire, then is God really helping me? This is going to come up later. Should I wait? This is going to come up later, so I'm going to try to just briefly mention it. The Bible refers to this process of sin, and it describes sin as beginning not with an act. That's like the terminal point. That's the end point. It describes it as beginning with a desire. Later on, McQueen talks about temptation, and he ties the notion of temptation to identity. I'll unpack that later, because that needs to be unpacked, because he's wrong. But he talks about temptation, and what he doesn't realize is that temptation is also not the beginning of the process. The whole process that ultimately culminates in this undesirable behavior that we typically call sin, the beginning of that process is not temptation, it is desire. Because the Bible says that a person is tempted when he is led by his own desire and enticed. He has the desire. The desire is a part of you. It's intrinsic to you in some ways. Every desire isn't, but in terms of sexuality, it is. And so it's like an unfair. So let me put it to you this way. He testified about, and I did not clip this, about a woman being delivered from crack, I think it was cocaine, in his church. Why is it that God was good enough and loving enough to deliver her from crack, but not to deliver you from homosexuality? I thought he was no respecter of persons. I thought it was according to our faith. But now a moral issue And God is going to continue to require, he's not going to change what you can't change. People say you do what you can and God will take care of the rest. He's not going to change what you can't change. Say, I can't change my desire because that's a part of me. And I can't depend on God to change it for me. I have to now just suppress my desire. See, it sounds like, because of how he speaks and sounds pastoral and sounds like a preacher. It sounds hopeful and theological that you can overcome through just the strength of force of will. But that's like asking a black person to stop being black. What did the prophet Samuel say? Men, carnal people, look at the outward appearance. God looks on the heart. Guess where you're gay? It's an internal thing that is an intrinsic part of who you are, just as much as a straight person being straight. And so this idea that, discipline, not deliverance, I find problematic.
I said, well, no, that's not going to, because I said, God, I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to lie. I've always been open with people. I'm not going to lie. The Lord spoke to me and said, are you tempted to lie from time to time? I said, yeah. He said, do you? I said, no. He said, well, then you're not a liar. You're not defined by your temptations. Stop making covenant with temptations. Stop finding identity in temptations.
Whoa.
If any of us found $2 billion sitting outside, we'd be tempted to not do what the law says and turn it in.
Yeah.
We'd be tempted to take it.
Yes.
But that temptation doesn't make me a thief.
Yeah.
I'm not my temptation. I have authority to resist.
So this is where I talked about how he equated sexuality with temptation. So again, temptation isn't the starting point, it's desire. And desire is the very definition of sexuality. Hello, right? And it's the very definition of sexual identity. The problem is that, and again, he should know better. He is defining sexual orientation on the basis of behavior. And basically saying, well, if I tempt you to steal this money and you don't steal it, then you're not a thief. If you're tempted to lie, but you don't lie, you're not a liar. So therefore, if you're tempted to sleep with another man, but you don't do it, you're not gay. Those are not the same things at all. Those first things are defined on the basis, literally on the basis of the action. Sexuality is not the same. Straight people know they're straight before they even have straight sex. They don't have to have sex to know that they're straight. Just like gay people don't have to have gay sex to know that they're gay. Because sexuality may produce behaviors, particular behaviors. It is not necessitated on the basis of sexual orientation. In fact, there are some people who engage in sexual behavior that is contrary to their innate sexuality. I know a number of gay people who engage in straight sex because of theology like Keith McQueen's. And on the basis of his belief that he's not going to, he mentioned this later on in the interview, he's not going to deny the world the blessing of his bloodline, then I have to believe that he's going to get married to a woman. That's his plan, and to have children with her. And yet he acknowledges the fact that he still has same-sex attractions, which means he's still gay. Then that means he's going to be one of them. A gay person who is engaging in counter-orientational sex, who was involved in a counter-orientational marriage. And so this idea that temptation defines identity is totally, totally false. Your internal makeup defines identity. And it is only on the basis of your presumption that being gay is a sin that you would associate it with temptation, because you don't associate blackness with temptation. I was tempted to write with my left hand. I'm left-handed. That's how I write. Right? I'm not tempted to be 6'1". That's simply how tall I am. It's not a temptation to be who you are. And to deny who I am is to reject an aspect of my what? Identity. Your identity is only found in Christ. Lies and deceit. There are many aspects to our identity. I am a believer in Christ. I am black. I am male. I am left-handed. I am gay. Or if you prefer, same-sex attracted, because we're so conditioned against the terminology of homosexual or gay. You want to talk about identity, you need to start by accepting yours.
Make a decision, say, that's not for me, because it robs me of the fullness of what God has called me to do. It robs me from the fullness of what God wants to do through my bloodline.
Oh my God.
I will not rob my bloodline. I will not rob the earth of what God has invested inside of me because I've made covenant with a temptation.
I'm not going to spend much time on this point because I kind of already made it, but there's that example of him acknowledging the notion that he is going to continue his bloodline. And I just find that so destructive because there are so many gay people who are marrying women and having children, bringing children into these situations that are doomed to failure. They're either doomed to failure or they are doomed to one or both, most likely both of you all just being miserable. As somebody who is married to a woman, I've lived it, and I've also seen it in countless examples of people who are in marriages that are not capable of providing a core function of what marriage is supposed to provide. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, scripture itself says that it is better to, even though God desires you to provide for him undistracted service. Read the whole chapter, 1 Corinthians 7. He is willing to share you with a spouse because it is that important to him that you don't burn with unfulfilled passion. It's better to marry than to burn, not in hell. It's better to marry than to burn with unfulfilled passion. If you marry counter-orientationally, guess what? You're going to still have unfulfilled passion because that wasn't the passion you were after. I know from experience. I've been married. I've had sex with my wife and then literally got up from the bed and went down and masturbated to gay porn because I was not fulfilled. And I finished. I did not finish. But sex and love is about more than just the sensation. It's about more than just the ejaculation. There was still something that my heart was crying out for. And guess what? The gay porn didn't feel it. The gay porn didn't feel it, but it sated it in a moment because I was so empty, even though I had just had this sexual experience with my ex-wife. One that finished. Why would you have to get up right then and go do the whole thing again if you already ejaculated? Because it's more than that. And it's bothersome to me that Keith McQueen doesn't know that, or if he does, he's choosing to ignore it and then to bring somebody into that type of situation. If I could have spared myself the years that I wasted married to a woman, if I could have spared her the years that she gave married to me, trying to make something work that was not programmed to work. It was not going to work. And now you knowing this already are going to choose to do that. That's some serious like couch stuff. Come out the pulpit and get on somebody's couch, because you are going to unnecessarily create very harmful situations, not just for you, but for the people that you're going to drag down with you. Not just the people submitted to your leadership, but this future wife that you want to expand your bloodline through. future children that you're going to bring into a home that at its very core is broken. My heart weeps that there are people going into these marriages with eyes open. I went into mine still thinking God was going to deliver me. Surely if I get married, he's going to see how serious I am about this, and he's going to deliver me from this spirit, right? Now I know better. I wish that he did too.
The Lord says, seducing spirits and doctrines of devils. Devils teach doctrines, and they invade parts of our theology and pathology that have not been patched or healed.
Devils do teach doctrine. And unfortunately, what I don't think that he realizes in this situation is that the doctrine that he's describing, anti-gay doctrine, is a doctrine of devils. The problem with this type of logic and pulling up passages like this is that anybody can pull that passage out and use it to apply to anything they disagree with. Anything they disagree with becomes a doctrine of devils. And you can try to frame it in such a way that it sounds convincing to those who can't see through that. You could apply that to anything you disagree with. Trinitarians call oneness theology a doctrine of devils. Oneness Christians call Trinitarianism a doctrine of devils. I just called anti-gay theology a doctrine of devils, and clearly McQueen and plenty of people like him believe that affirming theology is a doctrine of devils. So how about, rather than just trying to besmirch the doctrine itself, you investigate it? Since you don't know how to use the sword, let's use the sword and see what the sword has to say. It clearly doesn't say what you think it does.
There's an alternative. There is something that's offered. And in order for, that word, the word demon comes from the same word da, which is where we get the English word doe, like a John Doe or Jane Doe, for someone who's lost their identity.
Yes.
You don't know who you are. The demon says, I'll tell you who you are.
Not true. I've never heard this before. And so I looked it up because it could be an opportunity for me to learn. It sounds pretty profound, doesn't it? Like, whoa, that's deep. Like I said earlier, sometimes we're trying to sound so theological that we're just making up stuff. That's not true. According to my research, I was not able to find any etymological connection between demon or its root, daemon in the Greek, or a connection between that and doe. In fact, according to what I was able to find out, doe originates in Middle English. Middle English, not Greek, not Koine Greek 2,000 years ago, but Middle English. We're talking about 700 years ago, 500 years ago. Okay. And so just because it sounds similar, doe, day, doesn't mean that it shares an etymological root. And so making stuff up to sound profound is not the way to go. And maybe he did make it up. Maybe he heard it from somebody else, because oftentimes we hear things and then we just regurgitate it because we presume it to be true based on the source we got it from. Maybe he actually doesn't know. But, do some research. That's not true.
And that demon spirit attaches itself to a person. It attaches itself to their identity. And it's brilliant because when I come for the demon, you're going to think I'm coming for you.
Oh my God.
So you're going to defend that demon. Don't say, don't come for us. Don't come for us.
There's that laugh again. I suppose, I guess, be an indication that something was said that was so profound. I think that there is some truth, but it's the assumption that applies to LGBTQ plus people, right? It's interesting because earlier in this interview, he talked about how when it came time to have conversations about sexuality or homosexuality or things that he may have been feeling, the non-affirming mainstream church was not willing to have those conversations. It was the affirming community who was willing to have those conversations, was willing to walk through scripture. Even if you ultimately wound up disagreeing with their conclusion, they were willing to walk through scripture with you. So in that scenario, who was the demon who was taking it personally and saying, don't come for us? Who was the demon who didn't even want to broach the subject? Who was the demon who just wanted you to accept it just because they said so? It seems to me in this case that the affirming church was the one that was open to your questions. Even if you didn't ultimately land where they may have hoped that you landed, they were open to you investigating. And so again, we oftentimes use scriptures and use terminology to attack things that we disagree with when it can really be used or levied against anything or anybody. Whose side the demon is on in the last days, perilous times, and this and that, because he talks about that passage later on too. I don't know. I think I clipped it. Right. And we can use any of these types of passages to justify anything. Real theology and even real biblical scholarship goes deeper than that. That is surface level theology that actually does a lot more harm than good, because it manipulates the theologically untrained, which, let's be honest, is most of the Christian body, including Keith McQueen, by his own admission. It manipulates the theologically untrained into believing anything you say because you seemed to have the backing of scripture with you. And it's not so.
Because engaging in that lifestyle, I was being divested of value. I was being divested of value.
Did he really just use the term lifestyle? Like, did he really just do that? Oh my gosh. He is really reverting all the way back and just taking up all of the anti-gay theology, all of their language. This is like, oh, this is troubling. Divested of value, living the lifestyle. First of all, what is the lifestyle? And is that a gay lifestyle or was that your lifestyle? Because if it was your life, let's just own that. Let's not project that and put that on every LGBTQ plus person. So let's take ownership of our own choices. And then secondly, divested of value? No. You cannot be divested of value. Your value is intrinsic to your being. You will never, ever, you are listening to me right now, please hear me. You will never be less valuable than you are at your most valuable. Your value is not determined by your lifestyle. Even if I agree that homosexuality was a sin and you were engaging in it, it did not divest you of your value. Or even people who are engaged in behavior that we believe to be sinful and wrong and ungodly or whatever the case is, it does not divest them of your value was determined by your creator, and nothing you do divests you of it. Please hear that. Because what this man just said was absolutely, I don't even know the word to use. Let's just say it was horrible. And it fuels this despair that people unnecessarily wrestle with because they have been convinced by people like Keith McQueen and whoever was feeding his mind this nonsense into believing that they are worthless because they're gay. You just said that you were divesting yourself of value, which means that people who are still in the lifestyle are divesting themselves of value. At some point, they're going to have no value, or at least feel like they have no value based on your theology.
Talking about this ideal same-sex couple that looks, but where is it? It doesn't exist. We're not being, and I was trying to be it, and it was a lie, and we knew it was a lie, but we were perpetuating and protecting an ideal in the name of truth. It was just stupid.
I mean, here we go with this we again. If that wasn't your marriage, own that. But don't put that on other people. Don't put that on other people, and certainly don't put it on the whole community, which you're doing by saying, I keep saying you like I'm talking to him, which he's doing by saying it doesn't exist. Now, I will say that this ideal that we create in our minds doesn't exist. That doesn't exist in straight world, gay world, anybody. It doesn't exist anywhere. Everybody has a lived experience that is not on par with this idealized vision that we had Hollywood or church put into our mind, this picturesque, perfect marriage. But the idea that you can't have a healthy, lifelong, covenanted, committed marriage with someone as an LGBTQ person is a lie. It is a flat out lie. And it is a projection by someone who himself apparently did not experience it. But my thing is, if that wasn't your experience, fine, but own that as your experience and don't project that on everybody else and then put that out to the world. We try to make non-affirming people more open to the affirming movement and to accepting their LGBTQ loved ones. And here you are giving ammunition to them to think that we're just a bunch of hellions and that our marriages don't matter, that our marriages are fictional and that they're full of lasciviousness and carousing and unfaithfulness. If that described your part in your marriage, we don't know what your husband was doing, but by your own admission and words, then own that. Be accountable for that. But don't project it on other people.
And I begin to realize, the Lord said, do you realize how many people in the world have trauma that are tied to father wounds or mother wounds? He says this shows the necessity of the ministry of both mother and father. If people have mother wounds, then how can those ever be healed? How can that ever be patched, restored in a household with two fathers, with two dads? That because no matter how nurturing either of those men may be, they will never have the grace that God has given a woman to be a mother or daughter. It just won't be the case. It just isn't the case. And the Lord began to show that thing to me.
Okay, this actually doesn't make sense. If a person has mother wounds, how can that be healed in a house with two dads? If I'm married, my marriage's job is not to heal my parental relationship. It has nothing to do with that. I shouldn't be looking at my husband as a father figure or as a mother figure. He's my husband. And whereas this does happen, that happens also in straight marriages too, by the way. But this idea that there has to be a mother, and when you talk about a mother and a father in a household, you're talking about the child. What people generally are talking about, the child that needs a mother and father. But you're saying that it's the parent who has the mother wound, because the child wouldn't have a mother wound if they were not raised with the mother. So how are you trying to heal the mother wound by having a mother and father in the house when the child didn't have a mother wound to begin with? It's one of the parents who supposedly had a mother wound. But if they had a mother wound, being married to a woman, it's not going to heal that wound. It literally doesn't make sense. And it's also creating a false expectation of what marriage is supposed to do and how it's supposed to function. It's not your wife's job to heal your mother wound, nor is it your husband's job to heal your father wound. It's your job to get those wounds healed before you get married, hopefully. But oftentimes we take a lot of baggage into our marriages. That happens a lot, But again, the logic, it makes it sound so like, oh, that's so profound. Is it though? It literally doesn't make sense. But it also invalidates, by implication, every family structure, particularly those that have children, that does not have a mother or that does not have a father, whether that's as a result of single parenthood or as a result of same-sex marriage. That is toxic, that is dismissive and disrespectful. It is reductionist. There are so many ways that I can describe that horrible approach to understanding a person's relationship with their family, with their children. And the idea that somehow that child is missing something integral to their existence and formation because a man wasn't present or because a woman wasn't present. When we have so many people raised in single parent homes, you yourself, I keep saying you, Keith McQueen himself, by admission in the video, was raised by his grandparents, plural, a male and a female, and apparently a domineering male. So why is he gay again? I guess the preponderance of women in the church overpowered the maleness of the grandfather figure that he had in the home. And so what we can take from that is, if you want your kids to not be gay, don't take them to church. I mean, that's the illogic of this position. And I really, really hope that people are seeing through this, because everybody's not going to watch this video and see this thing picked apart. But I hope that people weren't led astray by what he has mastered the art of presenting in a way that makes it seem profound, when in fact, it's not.
Breaks me, man, because
Yeah.
at 9 years old, while you were casting out demons,
Yes.
the enemy was plotting on
Was
you.
plotting, was scheming, was saying, oh, no, I've seen this. Oh, no, this isn't going to be good. Oh, they cast out devils earlier. They cast us out earlier. We got to do something different with
It's
this.
only gonna get worse.
It's only going to get worse right here. Oh, I'm going to get you once you get from under that covering. Once you get from out of that household, once you get from, I'm going to get you.
So he was describing the fact that when he left his grandparents' home and went to college, he went buck wild, basically, right? That, and so there's a reason why there are so many examples of people who live with overbearing, hyper strict parents or grandparents. And then when they finally get out from under the yoke of that, they go buck wild. Is that the devil? Or is that a failure to allow a person to be fully formed experientially while they're under your covering, quote unquote, such that when they actually go out into the world, they're better equipped to make better decisions rather than just taking all the guardrails off and just going buck wild? Now, you went ham in college. Own that. Don't put that on the LGBT community. And I almost want to say, don't put that on the devil. I'm sure the devil played a part, right? But it wasn't as some demonic conspiracy to make you gay. You were gay. The problem, though, is that when we're in those types of environments and we can't barely breathe, then yeah, when you come out of that environment, you're going to go try to have some experiences. Be accountable for that. Be accountable for those choices and try to help other parents not make those types of mistakes with their children. But don't say that, oh, I was under their covering. No, you were under their prison. Because what he described earlier in the video, I didn't clip this part, I don't think, but what he described earlier in the video was that his grandfather actually whipped him in one instance for how he was carrying a book, I think it was. That carrying the book, he was carrying it too feminine. So clearly, this was a horrible environment that was not way conducive to holistic formation and a sense of integrated self, right? And so, yeah, when he went out to college, it was his chance to be free. And I wish that he would contextualize it that way. Even if the ways in which he behaved during that time were unhealthy, were undesirable, but at least characterize it in that way rather than deifying your grandparents, which he did later in the interview, as these wonderful people who who protected you as long as you were with them, but then all of a sudden the gays got a hold of you as soon as you left home. Just, he's feeding into all of the stereotypes and all of the bad theology of the anti-gay world. And it's just, it's frustrating because I expect the uninformed to be ignorant. I expect more from people who have walked this walk.
Another thing I started to notice in the community, people who would come into that affirming LGBTQ plus community, they would start out, Jesus. Oh, Jesus is love and Jesus. But after a while, you would start to see them gradually move into witchcraft.
No.
They would gradually move into the occult.
What?
Oh, yeah.
No.
Oh, for sure. We had, I would never forget, I was a part of an affirming inclusive LGBT organization. And we ended up finding out that we officially are ordaining and licensing psychics and mediums. We are ordaining with the oil of the Lord in the Holy Ghost sanctuary, psychics and mediums.
So if by now you don't know what organization he's talking about, you are very, very uninformed regarding the Black LGBTQ affirming church. I mean, this is like people know about this a lot of places. It's not like it's a secret. It's like, boss, he sure is kind of throwing him under the bus. The place that gave him a home, the place that gave him somewhere to go and grow and learn and be safe. And he's just, oh wow. So let me just first of all say, I don't support or believe in ordaining people who are identify as witches, are involved in the occult, are involved in witchcraft, are involved in these things, spell casting, things like that. Which, I mean, a lot of times the way y'all quote scripture is like you're casting a spell, but that's neither here nor there. I don't like that either. And I happen to be an LGBTQ affirming person, right? So this idea that this is endemic to the affirming community or the affirming movement, that kind of pisses me off. Because he's putting out there to the world that that's what we're about. It's not. And this particular church that chose to do that, that's on them. And whatever theology they have and whatever reason they decided to do it. Some churches are much more inclusive than my particular church. Some churches believe in radical inclusivity, where basically any belief, any practices are welcome here. And if that's the theology that you build that ministry on, then do what you do, boo. But that reflects that ministry. That doesn't reflect every affirming church. And the fact that he makes it like that's the natural progression of the affirming movement. I think I clipped it, but I may have cut it out for time. But he goes on to talk about how it's this gradual progression because it's the enemy's tactic in order to turn people over to witchcraft and ancestor worship and all these other kind of things. And I'm just like, dude, really? That's what you're going to go out to the non-affirming world who's already wrestling, try to understand what the heck it means for somebody to be gay and can they possibly be a Christian? And we're finally starting to open people's eyes to the fact that guess what? We love Jesus too. And you go there and tell them, oh, that's just how they start out. That's just how they get you in the door. By the time you leave, you're bowing at a statue of Baphomet. Really? That right there, that's not just a difference of theology. That's not just being uninformed. That's manipulative. That is, anyway, I don't want to take time to delve too far into it because I don't want this video to be too long. It's already long enough. But that right there, that was pretty bad. And to paint the whole community to the outside world, if you will, to paint the whole affirming movement as that's our MO. That's despicable.
They like to reframe prophets in that community. I had to stop actually for a while calling myself a prophet. They didn't want me to call myself a prophet. They didn't want me to do that. Some of them we even teach there are no more prophets. There are no more prophets because the prophetic anointing will call that out.
Oh my gosh.
And the prophetic anointing, me being born a prophet, that's why I could never fully settle into it. I could never fully settle because something in me was like, this ain't it. This ain't, it sound like God. It looked like God, but it ain't God. Something's off.
So he could never fully settle into it, which means that when you started your church that was affirming, you were not fully settled into it, which means that when you were preaching affirming theology, you were not fully settled into it, which means that when you were counseling and marrying gay couples, you were not fully settled into it. Sir, you think that you're coming for the LGBTQ plus community for the affirming church, you laying all your own sins bare. That you had so little respect for the mantle that was on your life, that you had so little respect for the weight of ministry, that you would engage in these things that by your belief was sending people to hell, or that at the very least you weren't sure was sending people to hell, but you did it anyway. That's not a theological conversation. That's a character conversation. That's a character conversation. And my intention here is not to just come out here and besmirch your character, because God in heaven knows I don't want to be personally attacking, but you are putting stuff out there about the affirming movement. They don't like prophets. Maybe that particular church doesn't like prophets. Do you realize how many churches, affirming and non-affirming, are cessationists? There's a whole movement of cessationism of people who don't believe in the present day manifestations of any of the supernatural things, movements of the spirit, including prophetic ministry. You ever heard of the Church of Christ? And they're just as anti-gay as they can be. So the idea that the affirming, my church is prophetic, my husband is prophetic, I have prophetic people in my congregation. The fellowship of which I'm a part is prophetic. Women and gay people are part of that fellowship. And not in the closet either. It's an affirming fellowship. And so, just, if that's your experience, I can't tell you it wasn't your experience, but that's your experience. Why are you taking your experience and projecting it onto the entire body of Christ? And why are you choosing, or the entire affirming movement, I should say, and why are you choosing to paint the entire movement on the basis of your willingness to suppress your prophetic gift in order to stay in a space that apparently didn't embrace it? You should have left. You should have left. Just like I would have left a Church of Christ church if I was a part of one and they told me that speaking in tongues wasn't real, because I'm going to pray in the spirit. Because I know it to be true. So, but rather than leave that particular environment that either was cessationist or just didn't believe in prophetic ministry, or whatever the case is, they believe there were no more prophets, in your words, and just go find an affirming church that does believe it, because there are plenty of them. You just choose to characterize the whole affirming movement that way. And so it's like Will Horn said last night. He talked about Tim Scott. I think about Candace Owens. It's so many. I can't think of all their names right off the top of my head. Byron Donalds. There are so many like Black people who have made it their mission to be an apologist for whiteness at the expense of Black people. And what I discern, to use theological language that, what I discern is that you are doing the same thing with the LGBTQ community. A community that embraced you, a community that affirmed you, and now that you want to kiss up to mainstream church like they kiss up to whiteness, you want to turn around and pay for your elevation in their world with the hurt and pain of the affirming at the affirming community's expense. That's despicable. That's despicable. And the truth of the matter is, whiteness does not accept Byron Donalds, Candace Owens, Tim Scott, or anybody else. They don't accept them, but they will use them to further their anti-black agenda. Not white people now, whiteness, the white power structure of supremacy and privilege. And guess what? The non-affirming, not just non-affirming, the anti-gay mainstream church, many of whom are gay themselves, let's be honest about that too, they're not going to accept you. You're too feminine. They're not going to embrace and accept you. They'll tolerate you. They'll even platform you. But they're going to use you to further their anti-gay agenda. And you're going to let them, because of what? The trauma bind that you tried to put on chosen families in the LGBT community. No, that's the trauma bind of you being so allied, so allegiant to your abuser that you've fallen so in love with what they can offer you, a feeling of self-worth because you didn't have value as an LGBTQ person, according to you. This, when I first heard this video, I'm like, I know I got to respond, but I don't want to respond to this and make it perfect. But as I listen to more and more of the video, I'm like, I'm not going to have a choice, because so much of what he's saying is coming from a place of personal, and I can't respond to it adequately and honestly. It would be disingenuous by not just putting it out there. And I hate that. I hate that. I once told my church, I don't like confrontation. And if you all do something that requires me to confront you, I'm probably going to come across meaner than I really desire to be. And it's not my intention, but I'm uncomfortable. And now I'm in a situation where I don't like confrontation. You have made me to have to confront you. And now on top of having to confront you, which already makes me self-conscious and, whatever case is, now I'm also mad at you for putting me in the position to have to do it. And that's kind of how I feel right now. That's kind of how I feel right now about Keith McQueen. I'm bothered that this even has to be said. And again, I don't know this man. We have had very few interactions, engagements. And in my mind, I'm thinking, God, he's going to see this video. And I just hate how I'm coming across. I hate how I'm coming across. Because I don't hate Keith McQueen. In fact, in a large part, not completely, because part of it, I think there's a lot involved in what I think. Anyway, because in a large part, I pity him. I see him like I see Donnie McClurkin. I see people who are trying to be what they're not because they've been conditioned to hate themselves, or to at least hate that part of themselves, and to do so in Jesus' name. And that breaks my heart. And it breaks my heart even more for Keith McQueen than it does for Donnie McClurkin, because as far as I know, Donnie McClurkin hasn't even been fully vested in or acquainted with affirming theology. Not only has Keith McQueen been acquainted with it, he's been teaching it, even though he himself didn't really believe it, like he just said. That bugs me. And the fact that I have to point it out bugs me. And the possibility, probably not, but the possibility that what I'm saying can hurt him bugs me. Well, you shouldn't care about hurting him, all the hurt he can cause. No, I care about the people he hurt. I also care about him too. You don't think God loves him because he hurt you? It's okay to actually care about people, even people who have done the wrong thing, even people who have hurt you. But what we can't do is allow that care, allow that, call it love, and allow that to keep us from this thing called accountability. And for calling out on behalf of those who were hurt, the nature of the wrong that was committed. I can love somebody who was an abuser, but what I can't do is take their side. I can pity them, but I can't take their side. And this right here, I'm so conflicted. I really, really am. I really, really am. Anyway.
You must be just as vocal as you were. For darkness, for my light. He said, you must be just as vocal. He said, or I will let your messages, your sound bites, and your sermons hunt you. So I said, whatever. I was away in London. My last trip to London last year. This had to be around November. And my phone was just blowing up. And there I'm sitting in freedom. And my phone is blowing up. And I'm like, what's going on? What is happening? And I got a call from a colleague that said, have you looked online?
What happened? Damn.
A sermon clip that I preached years ago went viral, preaching affirming theology. And it's also everywhere. Yeah. Did you see it?
I might have saw it.
Yes, you probably
did. Yeah, I might have seen it. Wow.
All my pastor friends like, yeah, we saw it. And it was an old clip, but it was a reminder from the Lord. Wow. He said, I told you. This was about maybe a couple of weeks later. He said, you won't be silent. Or I will let the clips keep coming and keep coming and keep coming and keep coming.
Last year, he said, he was in freedom in London, sitting in freedom. So he's already been delivered from affirming theology. But your church is still affirming, and you continue to pastor for another year. Your organization is still affirming, and you continue to pastor it. You continue to plant churches? I saw a flyer very recently. I was surprised because I'm like, this flyer was just posted, and your whole organization is not even. How are you posting flyers about pastoral installations and you are leaving the whole movement? Right? It was like he was still going, and that's one of the reasons people were so hurt, because it's like he was still going on with business as usual, even though this is not what he believed anymore. And one of the questions that Will Horn was trying to get at in the interview last night was, when did you go through this process? How long have you felt this way or whatever? And of course, 80% of this questions that were asked were not directly answered. But apparently, at the very least, it's been a year. Last November, that's a year ago. How many gay couples have you married since then? Because you said I keep saying he said on Will Horn's interview that he has married people he didn't believe should be married. And I'm like, wow, right? So clearly you've believed this for a long time. And by virtue of your being a prophet, you have felt this way the whole time, because the prophetic mantle required you to call it out, but you never did call it out, and even started a church on that very basis, in that very theology. So what was your prophetic mantle then? Where was his prophetic mantle then? And so, yeah, saints of the Most High, be careful who you are allowing to lead you. They just may not believe what they're teaching you. He made a statement last night. We believe everything we teach, but we don't teach everything we believed. Did you though? Did you believe everything you taught? Not you. Did he though? Did he believe everything he taught? Because it seems to me that at the very least, for the last year, he didn't. And for all the years preceding that, he wasn't sure. When I went through my transition to affirmation, I fought it tooth and nail. I did not want to believe it was true. My whole outlook on what my life was going to look like, what my ministry was going to look like, there was no place for me being gay in it. God was going to deliver me from that. This is just a temporary thing. This is the temporary, cross to bear, right? Anyway, I didn't want to accept something that seemed so fundamentally wrong. And I fought God on it. I remember one night in particular, I was heading home from my grandmother's house, I was crying. I was sobbing in the car, sobbing and begging God to kill me because I did not have the courage to kill myself, could not commit suicide. I was begging God to kill me, to have mercy on me, not let me become reprobate. I did not want to accept this. But at some point, God began to help me. One night he asked me, he said, is this so hard for you to accept because you don't like what my word is saying, or because you don't know what my word is saying, or because you don't like what it's saying? And I thought, oh my God, if I didn't know it, I'd still be searching. I'd still be looking. I'd still be questioning. But I had finished that process months before. I had searched, studied, conversed with people, had debate. I had all kind of, I had so many books on both sides of the issue. I was just a sponge for months and months going through this process of learning. I knew what the conclusion was. I didn't want it to be. So when I became affirming, it was because I knew, I absolutely knew. When I got divorced from my wife, it was because I knew. I absolutely knew. When I made my church affirming and came out to my congregation, it was because I knew. I absolutely knew. When I taught that thing, it was because I knew that thing. Because I wasn't going to teach it had I not known it. And the fact that he went through this whole time apparently not believing it, not knowing it, not being fully convinced in his own mind. Can anybody trust what he ever teaches? I would be questioning if he's really non-affirming, or is this just an opportunity for his own advancement? I think that's a horrible thing to think. I think it's a horrible thing to think. But based on the pattern of behavior, there's every reason to wonder. Because clearly we see that there is a character in ministry that is willing to, for whatever other price, for whatever reason, teach things that one does not actually believe. He talked about people being ordained witches in the church with the holy oil in the thing. You were marrying people at the holy altar and didn't even believe that they should be married. So who's more wrong? Right? And so it's just the hypocrisy of it all. And I just wish so much more for him than this. This ain't it, man. This ain't it.
For grace to plant ministries and plant, once again, it's just gifts and graces that I was born with.
Yes.
To plant ministries, to create networks, to and the enemy saw this and said, oh, I'm gonna use this. Oh yeah.
There was a great deal of self-aggrandizement in this interview. I didn't clip all of it, but if you watch this interview, there was so much talk about how he's so anointed and how he's so graced and how he's done this and how he's done that. How at this age he was laying on hands and casting out demons and how he was doing this. There's so much focus on himself, so little focus on the people who was trusting in that self for their spiritual well-being as their spiritual leader. I got to tell you, I went back and forth with myself as to whether or not I was going to even acknowledge that, even point that out. Because that, again, I initially wanted to focus on just the theology. But I think that it's important to acknowledge this because this points to, I think, if you listen closely, and I think that anybody who's been under his ministry can probably attest to this because I haven't sat under his ministry. It seems to be the case, at least by what I'm gathering from this interview, from his interview with Will Horn, from things that were shared with me by people in his ministry years ago. So there are people who believe that he's a narcissist. I got to be honest. I don't agree. what I honestly believe is that he has such a broken, and God, I don't want to be like like a armchair psychologist, but just as a pastor, as a spiritual leader, as one who has tried to help people find that identity and sense of self-worth, what I observe, and I could be wrong, is that his sense of self-love is so broken by how he was raised, by the environments he was brought up in, by this and that, all of that, this trauma bind he has with the mainstream church, right? That he has to overcompensate. And I see this a lot. The overcompensating presents as narcissism. It's not. It's a buffer to shield and cover the internal self-loathing that exists. And whereas even the narcissist deserves compassion because of their human worth, because even as a narcissist, they still have worth, I find it easier to have compassion, not toward a narcissist, but toward someone who is still struggling so much, even as a leader. To have all these people who are celebrating you, all these people who are supporting you, building ministry with you, and yet even through all of that, you still struggle to rest in self-love. That it still is such a challenge that you have to aggrandize yourself with every statement. There was so much self-aggrandizement in this interview. I've seen so much, even on Facebook, even in Facebook posts, for the years that we've been Facebook friends. I've seen it. I've seen it with a number of clergy, actually, and clergy in the affirming movement. It bothers me, but I understand it. I get it. We've been beat down for so long that sometimes, like, if nobody speaks for me, nobody, celebrates me, I got to do it for myself. But it doesn't land well when all your posts are about how great you are, how wonderful you are. It's like, are you trying to convince us or yourself? And the answer is yourself. And again, this is not a Keith McQueen thing. This is a whole lot of people. Mainstream church too. But I'm a part of the affirming church. I'm going to speak to that experience. I see it a lot. And I see people using the pulpit as their makeshift therapy session, their makeshift therapy project, to help them feel like somebody, to help them feel accomplished, to help them feel celebrated and seen. That's not the purpose of the church. And that's not the purpose of the people that God has committed to your care and keeping. And now at their expense, out the blue, he had a whole year in which he could have strategically brought this to his people. At the least, it was a whole year, because he said last year in November, he was in London free. While his people were still bound, he was free. He had a whole year to strategically bring this forward in a way that would be helpful and not harmful. But instead, to my knowledge, because I don't know all the information, but to my knowledge and to what was shared with me from people in his congregation and what I have been observing on social media from people in his congregations, this was all just sprung on them. Some people who said they were part of his church didn't find out until the doggone interview. That's how they find out that you're not affirming anymore. And you had a whole year of sitting on this. Did you have that little care for their spiritual well-being? Well, maybe so, because the only well-being that you were interested in was your own. And I get it, because it was coming from a place of brokenness. I get it. What do they say? Hurt people heal, hurt people, hurt people, hurt people. Right? You're sliced and diced by the mainstream church, but you're bleeding all over. the community that you're supposed to be helping, because you put yourself in the position of a spiritual leader and you accepted the consecration as a bishop. These are people that you are responsible for, because the text says you're going to give an account. And you're just bleeding all over them. And they're hurting because of it. And none of this was my intention to put in this video. But it needs to be said. Why didn't you reach out to him privately and say it? Because the offense was done publicly. And people need to see that other people see it. And that other people care. They need to know that they weren't crazy. We saw it. I commented on a post earlier today from somebody else who basically said the exact same thing. We saw it. Some of my spiritual sons, some of my godsons, you know how we have the gay family, which of course he delegitimized. But two of my gay sons, you call it, were part of his ministry. They saw it. They shared it with me. I did the best I could to try to hopefully encourage them to, you know, have you had conversations with them? Have you talked to them about that? You know, I asked them to have these conversations, to talk to them. It's not my place to go do it. I don't even know the man. But we saw it. And the thing is, it's a glass house. Most people see it if they're not enraptured in your ability to preach. If they're not caught up in the sight and sound of the performance that you're able to put on, because, you know, church folk can put on a good performance. We saw it. You're not fooling anybody. And so the thought that you've protected yourself from what you thought you were hiding from everybody else, you weren't hiding it. We just loved you through it. Right? Even from afar. When I was on your show, when you were on mine, I had already had a number of conversations from people in your congregation about things that they were experiencing, the manipulation, the control. This is not something new. I still loved you, even from afar. I still wanted to do ministry with you. Right? And even now I'm like, am I going to like edit this out of this video? But I don't think that I am, because like I said earlier, I think that it has to be said. One of the worst things that we do is sweep things under the rug for the sake of the abuser. Even if that abuse is not intended, even if it wasn't thought out or planned, it still happened. And we have countless experiences of families where children have been sexually abused, emotionally abused, physically, but I want to focus on the sexual abuse because that's something that I think many people can relate to and recognize that it's happened in our families. People have just swept it under the rug. Happened. You're going to be all right. You can't destroy the family over this. Whatever reason, whatever justification, they choose not to believe you, even though I think they kind of do believe you. They just don't want to believe that they believe you. Sweep it under the rug. We cannot, the abused person has already paid a price for that experience. It was the abuse. We cannot make them pay an additional price on behalf of the abuser by not addressing what was going on. What we're seeing is just a symptom of a much deeper issue that has been ongoing for years. And I want to challenge people with the idea, with the notion that at some point we have to exercise a degree of accountability for ourselves, even as abused people, to remove ourselves from situations that we see are toxic. Quit trying to spiritualize it. Well, God's trying to teach me something. When Jesus taught people, he said, he that hath an ear, let him hear. He didn't send them through hell. He didn't send them through abuse. That's toxic theology. When he wanted to teach you something, he taught you. Anyway.
They can't come argue. Can't argue with me because I lived it.
Ooh.
Don't tell me about your marriage. I was married for 10 years.
Come on.
Don't tell me about your utopia because I know the truth.
You don't know the truth. You know your truth. You don't know everybody's marriage. You know your marriage. Again, projection and assuming that everybody else's situation is yours, is identical to yours. Even if you had people in your world, colleagues, whatever the case is, who you are aware of who had the same issues that you did, don't put that on everybody. Can't nobody tell me nothing because I already know because I was a hoe in my marriage. How does that apply to anybody else? But that's what we're chosen. That's what we're expected to accept from you.
Don't tell me where mine is different. I have counseled every kind of couple you can think of. I have performed marriages for every kind of couple you can think of. I know the truth. And as I was coming to the end of that journey, it was hard because I would know the truth and be sitting there in front of the couple and they're like, we can't figure it out. We can't make it work. And I wanted to say, because you're not supposed to be together.
Oh my God, because you wanted to fight for the illusion with them.
You're not supposed to be together. That's what's wrong.
Did you tell them that? How many people did you marry not believing they were supposed to be together? My heart really goes out to every couple that Keith McQueen married. I am so sorry that the man of God who sealed your union didn't believe in your union. I am so sorry. And although that's not me, I didn't do that to you. I believe very strongly in collective responsibility. I'm still a clergy person, and this still happened to you. I am telling you, I am sorry that you deserved better from your spiritual leader and from somebody who solemnized your union. And it is certainly my hope that your marriage has survived. And if it hasn't, that the next time you will be able to have somebody who is actually wholly, WHOLLY, in your corner. Because what he just acknowledged is not okay.
There's no manuscript for this because it is not prescribed in the word. Well, we can't get along. There's no manuscript for submission, honor, any of the above. This is a two-headed monster.
I'm so not glad that y'all found that notion so hilarious. People's marriages, that you found it so funny that it's a two-headed monster, that you didn't have the tools to help them to navigate because you were only working with outdated notions of patriarchy. There's no model for submission. Well, what about mutual submission to two partners in a marriage rather than just one partner because she has a vagina and to submit to the one who has a penis? Right? Or were you trying to duplicate the male-female paradigm by thinking, oh, I can only be the top in this marriage because I have to be the one who's in control, and the one who's penetrated has to be the bottom because he has to be the one that's being controlled. You see that toxicity? And we do that a lot in same-sex marriages because we only know about or see the pattern of the heteronormative paradigm that's steeped in patriarchy, and then we try to reproduce that in our own marriages and wonder why it's not working. It's not working because that's not what your marriage is. their marriage shouldn't be that way in 2025, but oftentimes it is still steeped in patriarchy. But yours doesn't have to fall into that trap. But according to, clearly it would seem to me that Keith McQueen is still stuck in that outdated notion of patriarchy and male submission. Now, that's the implication. He didn't explicitly state that, but based on what he's been saying so far and how much he has adopted the language of the mainstream anti-gay church, I am not in any way doubtful that that was the implication. He talked about motherhood and fatherhood and how a mother can't teach, basically how to teach a boy how to be a father, this and that. So much of his rhetoric is steeped in patriarchy. And I feel bad because I was raised Pentecostal. I know he was raised Pentecostal. And I know how heavy-handed Pentecostal theology can be and the whole Pentecostal structure of the church can be. He's got it bad, y'all. It affected him in a major way. And I need y'all to understand something. Keith McQueen is not a bad person. He's a broken person. What we are seeing is not, as he thinks, a result of his healing. No, this is emblematic of his brokenness. Please recognize him as the victim of traditional church, of mainstream church, and bad theology. Even like I said earlier, that lack of self-esteem and self-love being, what's the word I used? Presenting as narcissism. That's brokenness. Brokenness. I watched this video and I saw such woundedness, but it was still irritating because like, you can be wounded and still not lash out at people who tried to help the community, who embraced you, right? So that was like, that's not okay. And then they have to try to stand in the defense of those people that you hurt and that he hurt, and then try to provide a rebut to the perspective that you brought, be they theological or personal as well. It was necessary to do it for the sake of the people who have been negatively affected. But it is not my desire. It was not my desire. Certainly hope that how I came across, or I should say how I'm coming across. We're wrapping up soon, but I'm coming across is not in such a way as to make him out to be a bad person. He's not a bad person. I believe his heart is pure, but it's covered by such an amount of baggage, scarring, and woundedness. It can be so easy to see him as the villain. Please don't. I'm not asking you to commiserate with your abuser. I'm not asking you to sympathize with your abuser. I'm just saying, see their humanity, know that God still loves them, and find a way to still love him too. Even if for your well-being, it has to be done from a distance. You don't have to have people in your life and in your circle, in your world, in order to love them. Love can happen from a distance. Because guess what? You have to love yourself too. And sometimes loving yourself requires distance. It's frustrated, as in some cases offended, as I said I was earlier. I just can't help but just be moved with such compassion. It's so weird because I was in that place before I became affirming. So to see somebody go back to their own vomit, it's like, wow. To see somebody return willingly to Egypt, it's like, that bothers me. But you know what bothers me more? All of the collateral damage. And that's why I'm doing this video.
That's where I'm at. I've seen my relationship with my family rekindle, because I did not talk to my family for years. My grandmother and my mother, she raised me. She and I are going to church for the first time in years together. In years. We have not been to church together in years.
I'm sincerely glad that his relationship with his family is rekindled. At what price? Right? And you kind of just sit back and think, well, that explains a lot, right? If this is what your MO was, if this is what was motivating you to make this move, this transition, to be embraced by those who first cast you out, who first cast you aside, maybe those that you look up to in ministry, who themselves are not affirming, may themselves be gay. We don't know, right? But oftentimes we see that to be the case. And you needing to have their legitimizing, if you will. And it could be the case that none of this is true. I will offer that I don't know Keith McQueen, but I do know much of the human condition. And I wouldn't be surprised if it were. I think that it's sad, though, that the price of being in contact with your family and of even being able to go to church together hinges on your denial of who you are and of your embrace, your denial of your embrace of who you are, if indeed you ever actually embraced it, because as you said, the prophet in you knew it was wrong the whole time.
Take off the blinders and show them how beautiful they are and they're wonderful. Like, you filthy. You are literally coming in agreement with hell concerning your child. You're cursing them, and that's why they're not coming out. You're pushing them further and further into it. Love and kindness is what will draw them, because I guarantee you on that side, somebody's introducing a version of perverse love that they have hooked onto. You need to show them the difference.
So the love they get from the affirming church is perverse. But what they've been getting from their family, that's perverse too, right? Because it's pushing them further into the perversion of affirmation, of homosexuality, the lifestyle. I'm not sure exactly which one of the things you were claiming they were being pushed into, but show them love the right way, because affirming Christians are incapable of loving them the right way, because all they want to do is hunch. All they want to do is have sex. If that has been your experience, that the only interactions that you have had with people have been sexual in nature, and for the purposes of transparency and clarity, I pointed out that we have had interactions, and I want you all to know none of them have had any sexual innuendo, purpose, point, goal, target, whatever the case is. So I know he's had some interactions, at least, with affirming people that were not of a sexual nature, people who did not want something, have something, an ulterior motive, right, behind those engagements. Even though now he's presenting to the non-affirming world that that's what the affirming church is about. We're supposed to be offended by that. We're supposed to be offended. It's supposed to bother us. My offense is less about me, because I don't know the man, right? So nothing that he really says or does has any impact on me. I'm offended really on behalf of the movement, on behalf of people who have had the courage to come out of these spaces and not know what it's going to look like to do something different. Sometimes they did it wrong, right? Sometimes they were moving in their own hurt and pain, but still desired to help somebody else, provide a space for somebody else. And sometimes they did it out of their own need for affirmation. It's the wrong reason to start a church, but it happened. And I understand that being a reason why it happened. And just to see that courage and that pain pissed on, that's me. That bugs me. I want you to know, if you are out there and you are hurting as a result of this, I hurt with you. I hurt for you. I lived my whole life on this side of affirmation, being attacked and being, ridiculed, and I go into this debate spaces all the time, having debates with people who, attack and ridicule and things like that. I mean, that doesn't bother me, and it does not bother me at all. In fact, I welcome it because I look forward to being able to bring that point of view into a space that may not have heard it before. I know the people I'm debating are not going to listen because they're too busy trying to save face, but people who are listening in that audience will. And so that's my agenda, is to reach them. So I'm accustomed to being in those spaces, and I'm accustomed to hearing this kind of theology. And even though it offends me as an LGBTQ person because it's coming from an LGBTQ person and somebody who should know better, am I hurt by it? I'm not hurt by it personally. I'm not. But I am hurt that you're hurt. That really bothers me because I know that some of you all, there are people in my church, for example, the sanctuary, my church, the sanctuary was their last stop on their way out of church, period. Me and God will just be okay over here in Bedside Baptist because I'm done after this. I'm going to try this one more time. And I thank God that they made their way to the sanctuary and they're still there. I thank God for that. There are some who were not just on their way out of the church. There were some who were on their way out of the faith. And I thank God they made their way to the sanctuary. So the idea that some of you all can be hurting like this, and perhaps McQueen's ministry was your last stop, and now you are done, bothers me because God is bigger than Keith McQueen. Well, me and God are okay. I'm just not going to church anymore. Church is bigger than Keith McQueen. And Jesus said, upon this rock, I will build my church. He established this gathering of believers for a reason. You need it in your life. I'm just going to do my thing. No. You need covenanted community. You need that. I know there are people who disagree. I can only bear witness to what I believe to be true. You need that. And the prospect, the possibility that you have been robbed of that because of what Keith McQueen has done and is doing, that bothers me. It's the reason that I ultimately decided to do this video. And so I'm hopeful that if I can in any way keep you from making that choice, I understand it. I understand that choice. But if I can in any way keep you from making it, because there are affirming churches who care and who are trying to do this the right way. There are affirming leaders who are not broken. There are affirming leaders who are truly and sincerely seeking to help people heal and to help people thrive, who are not using their congregations as a way of feeling better about themselves, as a way of soothing their own broken ego, wounded ego. Even if that was a part of their past, maybe they've gone through the process of counseling and therapy, and they've gotten healed. I want so badly to say, try again. And in my heart of hearts, that's what I say, try again. But at the same time, I don't know where you're going to try. And just like there are mainstream churches that are toxic, guess what? There are affirming churches that are toxic too, because, newsflash, there are human beings in them. There are human beings leading them. There are both non-affirming and affirming churches that I wouldn't send my dog to. Do I just tell you to try again and take the risk that you'll find a good one? Because there are great ones. And risk your well-being, risk the fact that you have to even make the choice. So devastating to me. Trying to keep from crying, like right now. Okay, one thing that I know is that the church, the world is much smaller now. Many churches provide virtual membership options. I can't vouch for every church. It's like DYOR, right? Do your research. I preached a message once about dating. Date the church. You don't have to get married right off. Date the church before you make that covenanted membership, right? Check it out. Are we a good fit? Do you need some therapy before I commit to you, right? That kind of thing. Certainly the sanctuary is available. We have virtual membership options. I'm not here trying to do a membership drive. I'm just saying that because my church is the only church I can vouch for. Because I mean, I'm the only person whose heart I know. I know some people who I truly believe are good and sincere people. And they are out there. There are ministries out there, but search, look around. I don't know what area you may live in. Search. If there are none in your area, look for virtuals. Like I said, the sanctuary has a virtual option. The sanctuarystl.org. Check us out. It may not be a good fit for you. It may not be right for you. There may be somebody else. But try again. Part of me doesn't want to say try again because I don't want you to get hurt again. Try again. But don't jump in too soon. And don't jump in because of the charismatic personality of the leader. Pay attention.
Come out of ego, because a lot of parents can't minister, especially fathers. They struggle because identity comes from the father, and they're like, well, what aspect of my identity did you get this from?
More harmful patriarchal nonsense. The identity comes from fathers. A mother cannot impart identity. Any mother who was abandoned by the father is now raising children with no identity. This is just, this is so toxic. It's horrible.
Love. You can't spank it out of them.
Come on.
You can't yell it out of them.
Yes, sir.
You have to love it out of them. You have to love it out of them, because when they experience that true, authentic love,
Thank you, Jesus,
it's going to begin to minister to their value system.
And didn't he say earlier that it was just his cross to bear? That it was his thorn, right? That God said, my grace is sufficient. I'm not going to deliver you. You're going to have to just be disciplined through this, right? So why can't somebody love it out of you if it can be loved out of other people?
Spirit of the living God, I pray that you will begin to restore hope back to homes, that you will restore God-ordained marriages in the name of Jesus. For that person that's trapped in a marriage that was not sanctioned or ordained by you, I pray, Father, that you would begin to give them the tools and the wisdom to align themselves with your intention for humanity, your intention for the future.
Yes.
This is why I don't ask everybody to pray for me. Because some people don't know what to pray. They pray their own theology. They pray their own desires. And I want to say, just pray in tongues, pray in the spirit, because your own understanding is so lacking that what you're praying is not what I'm asking. Don't ask folks to pray for you just because they can preach. I don't want you praying for me because I don't know what you're going to pray. In fact, I probably do know what you're going to pray, which is why you can keep your prayers to yourself, right? This would be an example of that. So you just invalidated every marriage of a same-sex couple because yours didn't work out. You invalidated every marriage, even the ones that you united in marriage. And your prayer is to get them out of it. Oh my gosh. Listen, I have kind of already in the previous clips kind of brought this to a close, kind of put my ultimate seal and intent on why I decided to record this video. All I can say is that I know that I spoke passionately about certain things. I spoke directly about certain things. It is not my intention to have painted Keith McQueen as an enemy or an adversary. although his theology is certainly adversarial. But it is my intention to let you feel seen and to let you hear from another spiritual leader that was wrong. He was wrong in what he said. He was wrong in all the laughing he did while saying it. He was wrong in the way in which he chose to say it. I don't have all the details, but from the beginning of the interview, it sounds like he reached out to this individual to be interviewed on his podcast. So Keith McQueen initiated that. That was the plan. Why you would do that rather than internally in your own ministries preparing your people is beyond me. But it goes back to that question of character, and it goes to a question of intent. What were you intending to accomplish? And whose needs were you intending to meet by taking this approach? It really does make you wonder, why did you choose this route? And so those are questions that may never be answered. He certainly doesn't owe me those answers. I'll probably never speak to him again, not because of my choice, but after he sees this video, he probably won't ever want to talk to me again. Not that we ever talked a lot in the first place, but it still bothers me. I don't want to make him or make him a horrible person. But you put the stuff out there that has to be responded to. Somebody has to advocate for the people that are, I would like to say collateral damage. But hell, at some points, it seemed like you were coming directly at them. They wasn't collateral damage at all. They were just the people you were choosing to wound. And why? There are plenty of people who have theories. I have theories myself. I'm not going to share them because I don't know. So why put that out there like that? But there are many questions. And unfortunately, Will Horn's interview with Queen didn't provide many answers. I'm not sure that people are ever going to get any. What I did see on his wall since that time of the interview, a number of posts were him making himself out to be the victim. And I thought that was pretty disgusting. These people are hurting. It's been brought to your attention that they're hurting. You apologize for hurting them more than once during the course of the interview. But yet your behavior doesn't seem to be consistent with that contrition, with any substantial acknowledgement that you went about this the wrong way. More so seeming to be an obligatory appeal for people to release you from the consequences of your choice and choices. So I hope that you come out of the pulpit and get on the couch, because the work ain't over. You say you were sitting in London free, you still got some chains to lay down. And I strongly encourage you to get the psychological help that from a trained medical or psychological professional. Not from your pastor. Every pastor needs a pastor. Not from your pastor, unless he has some qualified credentials. You may never come back to the dark side, right? You may never come back into the light, honestly, of affirmation. That's your life. That's your choice. But if you're going to be wrong, and anti-gay theology is wrong, if you're going to be wrong, at least be wrong and healed. Don't do this to your life and to your ministry and still be broken or operating under the veneer of healing, when in fact, like I said earlier, you've got this trauma bind with your abuser. Get healed. Those of you who are watching, you're hurting. Get healed. get healed. There are spaces you can go to get help. Avail yourself of it. If that help is beyond the scope of what well-intentioned but sometimes untrained clergy persons can provide, get professional help. But don't just stay hurt. And don't just stay mad. Feel it. Own it. Right? Legitimize it. You're not crazy. If you need a third party to tell you you're not crazy for feeling how you feel, then take it from me. You're not crazy. And it's okay to feel what you're feeling. But what's not okay is that you let it dictate how you move forward. That you let it dictate whether or not you'll continue in faith. That you let it dictate whether or not you'll ever go back to church. Don't give his brokenness that much power. Life. Don't do that. He was talking about taking authority. You take authority over what he has done and the harm that he has caused. And you come out on the other side better. That may happen today. It may happen a month from now. It may happen a year from now. But come out better. And come out better on purpose. Don't just luck up into your healing by happenstance. Be intentional about it. What you're feeling is real, and I want to validate that. And I want to encourage you that what you may have believed about the church and the possibilities of the church is real. We ain't all like that. Just like I was trying to say about what McQueen was saying about the affirming church and how we're just hypersexual and how we're just this and how we're just that. We ain't all like that. Right? Well, in the same way, what you may be thinking or feeling about, I'm just tired of the church. We ain't all like that. And so take the time you need to do the work you need to get the healing you need, because your well-being is paramount. But just keep open that option of not letting his situation deny you of the blessing of covenanted community. And I mean covenanted community of faith. Child, being a part of a church. Okay. Trying to find the specific words and language to use. All right. I'm going to leave you with that. I do encourage you, if you need to reach out, there are people who you can reach out to. I am one of them. If you need to reach out, please do so. Okay. You can reach out in Messenger, on Facebook, if you have access to my account. Or I'm not private or anything. Find me on. My email address is my initial R Parks Weekly, no hyphen, all together, R Parks Weekly at the Sanctuary STL is for St. Louis, the Sanctuary STL.org. I know it's a long email address. R Parks Weekly at the Sanctuary STL.org. Reach out if you need to. I don't have all the answers, but I'm willing to walk through it with you. I'm willing to walk through it with you if you need it, if you desire. Listen, I love you. If you have any questions, maybe this threw up some theological questions. Am I going to hell? Right? Ask the questions. Let me just give you the answer. If you do, it won't be because you're gay. Put it that way. First of all, I don't believe in hell, okay? The way that it's traditionally taught and the way that I think Keith McQueen probably believes it, the way that he said people going to hell in one of his clips. But anyway, so that's a whole other thing to unpack. But if you have questions, if it's raised any theological issues for you, ask. Okay? And just know that you're not alone. You're surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses of other people who unfortunately are also hurting. But also you're surrounded by people who are healed and who stand ready to help you in any way that we can. I love you. I love you. Keith, it may not seem like it. I love you too. I really do love you, and I wish the best for you. I want you to bring your butt back over to affirmation after you get some healing and after you realize that, but come on back into the light, Caroline. the light will still have you. Okay. Y'all have a good night.